Begin the current Daf, Eruvin Daf begin 5 months down from the top of the Amud, where we continue on the theme of the previous Daf, discussing the laws of Paritz Ka'imah when the breach is the same as the closed area. Shiur's corresponds to Kazakh and Cheskel Torah anytime Daf. Chaim Peshem was joining us for today's Daf. Some of the things we're going to be speaking about today's Daf is, like we said, continuing from the previous Daf, the Machlekes, when Paritz Ka'imah, when you have that the breached area is the same as the closed area. It's actually not exactly precisely the picture, this is a different picture, but let's say the breached area is the same as the closed area. Additionally, we discuss an interesting case in Amud Beis regarding, which many people do when they make sukkahs. If, let's say, you're making the horizontal lines within less than 3 tfachim from each other, so essentially you can really have a mechitza of 10 tfachim just by having it less than 3 tfachim one from the other, known as lavid, and that's one way of making a partition. Some key terms and concepts are mechitza shel shasi v'ayrev. That's going to be important on the second daf, regarding if you have a partition, let's say, of either or both, of just the vertical and the horizontal, and mechitza tluya, which is a hanging partition, which is it's a full partition, but it's hanging and it's higher than 3 tfachim from the ground. So begin the current daf. We're in the middle of the discussion that we had in the previous daf regarding Paritz Ka'imah, and what happens if you have that the breaches are the same size as the closed area. So we said in the previous daf, so Machlekes, Rav Papa says it's permitted, Rabbi Shloimy says that it's us. Now the Gemara brings a brisa which relates to the laws of Klein. And the law is one may only plant grain near a vineyard if there's a valid difference between them. And the Gemara brings a brisa, which is a little bit complicated, but that will reflect on this halacha of Paritz Ka'imah, if the breach is the same as the closed area. So the Gemara says we're 5 lines down at the top of the Amud, Daf Tezai, Tashema. Let's bring a raya regarding this machlekes of Paritz Ka'imah. This is the beginning of the Mishnah Masechtas Klayim, that in the 4th parak that we learned this brisa. Says the brisa like this: Nimtza Satoimer, comes out that you're going to say Sholosh Midas b'mechitzas. There are 3 types of measurements, 3 types of dimensions that relate to the walls, as it is for Klayim, for forbidden mixtures of planting other grains near a vineyard. First one is like this: Kol, any wall that's made shohu, that the reeds are standing, or like the poles, or whatever it is that the wall is, but their pachas, they're less than the width, mishleishim, of less than 3 tfachim. So then what you need to have is tzarich shlehei bein zeh zeh shleishim. So that's like this picture of somebody that's small over here. But you need to have, it shouldn't be between, so if each pole is less than 3 tfachim, you need to make sure that less than the between every pole is less than 3 tfachim too. Kadeshli is dakar hagdi b'vasarei, so that a kid goat cannot just walk directly through without anything stopping it. Because if a goat could walk through, whether because of the height or whether because of the width, it invalidates it. You can't see it as love it as closed, because it's a virtual wall, but goats are walking through it. Now, if you don't have between each pole 3 tfachim, then even, and this is going to be important because this is going to be part of the discussion that is a little complicated, we'll try to explain that as simple as possible, but even here, if you let's say have the breach more than the closed area, so let's say the poles themselves are only 2 finger breadth, and the gaps are 2 tfachim between each one, it's still going to be kosher. Because anytime you have a space less than 3 tfachim, you say lavid. So all of it is used as if it's closed. If it's 3 tfachim, that's really problematic because of, you can't say lavid. And here you need lavid, because without lavid there's nothing, there's no significance. Each pole is less than 3 tfachim, it's not going to be considered a mechitza. So as long as it's less than 3 tfachim, even though the paritz is more than aimin, in this case, it's going to be a valid mechitza. That's case number 1. Second type of category is kol shuhu gimel. If the poles themselves are 3 tfachim, and so too megimel adal, or let's say they're more than 3 tfachim up until 4 tfachim, but not 4 tfachim. That's going to be the 3rd category. You need to make sure that between each pole you don't have the same amount as the pole itself. And the reason for that is kadeshli Paritz Ka'imah, so that it shouldn't be that the breach is going to be the same as the closed off area. And as long as it's not kimalui, as long as you have the same amount, even though you have a gap of 3 tfachim, whereas in regards to the first case we said if it's 3 tfachim, then we said that would be a problem, because then you wouldn't be it would say love. But here, even though it's 3 tfachim, since the oimid is more than the parts, so you cannot say that the aver of high gisa and the aver of high gisa, that the ear space on either side is going to come mevatlet, because it's not mevatlet. This is actually bigger than the ear on this side of it. So therefore this, let's say it's more than 3 tefachim, the gap is going to be considered as a pesach, is going to be considered as an opening, and therefore it's not going to be a problem. More than 3 tefachim is only a problem by loved. Here we don't have to say loved. We have oimid meruba. We have more oimid. We have, as long as you don't have paritz ka'oimid, so then it's going to be okay. Which obviously that's going to be the point we're going to prove that it seems to be like Rav Huna and Papa. Because he's saying conditionally paritz ka'oimid is obviously that if it is, it actually would be a problem. Then continues the brisa. But let's say the breach was more than the closed off area, which Gemara later on is going to explain. Wait a second, just based on what you said, you should have said if the parts was ka'oimid, then it's going to be a problem. Because you just said it has to be oimid merubal parts, which the inference is that if it's the same, it is a problem. Why are you saying now if the parts in merubal oimid is going to be a problem? The inference already was, and that's what the Gemara is going to point out that also. So then av keneged oimid also. Then even opposite the closed off area, you're not allowed to plant opposite it. And the reason for that is because, as we'll see this on the base, because a pole less than 4 tefachim is not strong enough to permit even opposite this board itself if the paritz is meruba on the oimid. And it's as if you don't have a mechitza at all, and if it's paritz meruba, then you can't plant opposite the mechitza even at all. That's case number 2. Again, so far, if you're just helping cover, you can look at this. We went with, if it's less than 3 tefachim, then the second category was, no, if it's 3 up until 4 tefachim, and now we're going into the next dimension. It says the brisa kol shu daled. If it's at least 4 tefachim, umar ba, that's amas, the same thing would apply from 4 tefachim all the way till 10 amas, including 10 amas itself. Then sarch shelo yehei bin zel lazei k'melu. You have to make sure that you don't have, similar to what we said in the previous case, that it shouldn't have the same amount as the gap shouldn't have the same amount as the closed off part. And the reason for that is shelo yehei parts climate, that you shouldn't have the breach part is like the closed off part. Because as Rashi says, the reason why we're saying up until 10 amas, if let's say the closed off area, the board was let's say 12 amas or 15 amas, you wouldn't be able to say that the shear of the breach is like the closed off area, because then actually even if the breach is less than the closed off area, it would still be a problem if the breach is at least 10 amas. Then it would be totally forbidden, as the Seif is going to say, any breach is more than 10 amas is considered a breach, cannot be considered as a pesach and invalidate the whole enclosure. So that's what we're saying up until 10 amas. So we're saying that you have to make sure that the breach is not the same amount as the closed off area. Now, let's say the breached area was the same amount as the closed off area. So here it's actually different than the second case. In the second case, we said that then it would totally invalidate it. Here, keneged oimid mutter. Here, actually, opposite the board itself, you would be permitted to plant a different type of seed on the other side of the vineyard. And the reason for that is, since the board itself is already 4 tefachim, it's considered a significant thing in its own right, and you could plant on the other side of the board. Now, the same thing is, even if paritz is meruba, even if the breach is more than the board, the Gemara later on is going to explain, you could plant opposite the board. Now, but keneged paritz, opposite the breached area, also that's going to be forbidden, because again, since here you have a paritz ka'oimid, or let's say paritz meruba la'oimid, so that's not going to permit the whole area, only opposite the board, and then you cannot plant opposite the breached area. So, as Rashi explains, we had 3 different measurements we mentioned. In the first category, we spoke about where the poles themselves are less than 3 tefachim. So then we don't really care about milui on the gap area, because since it listens less than 3 tefachim, we wouldn't be concerned even if the milui has more than the pole itself, because until you have a breach of 3 tefachim, you're going to say love it. That's the first category. The second category is talking about if you have the pole as at least 3 tefachim. Then we're concerned about milui, about the gap being the same amount as the board itself. Because now when it's already 3 tefachim, you already have the share of the pirtz of a breach to be considered as quote avir, where then the avir, if it's more than the board, you would say would come and be mavatal, the oimid, where even opposite the board itself would not be permitted. The third category was, we have already a very significant board, it's at least 4 tefachim, then the airspace is not going to nullify the board itself. It could nullify the area. If let's say it's the paritz ka'oimid or paritz meruba la'oimid, you wouldn't be able to go in the breached area, but opposite the board, it would never nullify, and you always allowed to plant opposite the board. That was the 3 cases. Now, parenthetically, the brisa says there are 3 klolim that you could learn out from what we just said. If the closed off area was more than the breached area, av keneged paritz mutter, then even opposite the breached area is going to be permitted like an opening. And as Rashi points out, that's in all 3 cases. Even on the middle case of when the board is from 3 to 4 tefachim, because we said also over there, you need to make sure that you don't have the same amount as the gap having the same as the board itself, but it sounds like if it's less than the closed off area, then it would be permitted. So you see that as long as oimid meruba l'paritz, you're allowed to go ahead and plant anywhere, even where there's a breach, because we consider it as all closed. Second call we learn that is nifrit b'yosem eser. If the breach is more than 10 amas, and that's anywhere, they would be us. They would be forbidden, even if all of the chutzner, of all of the area is closed, what's called oimid. Still, it would be a problem because even though you have oimid meruba, but the pirza breach more than 10 amas is considered as breached, and it's not a closed area anymore. You can't call it as a pesach.
Love is not going to help with that.
For which? Love is not going to help for parts meruba, and it's not going to help for when you have a breach more than 10 amas. Love it only helps for less than 3 tvachim. And if it's less than 3 tvachim, even if you have parts meruba, it's not going to be a problem.
Less than 3
yeah, we're not going to call that. Yeah, we're not going to call that parts meruba. That's called closed. That's not parts meruba. We don't view that as a breach. If you have less than 3 tvachim between every single pole, we view the whole thing as closed. We don't view it as parts meruba.
So you don't care how thick how wide the.
As long as less than 3 tvachim, we consider it as closed. Even if the pole is like a finger breadth, and then this is like 2 tvachim, and then again a pole, that would be considered all as closed. And the third case is hayusham kanam hadikranim. If let's say there were these pointy pegs stuck into the ground, v'oislan pei malmala, and you make like a braided vine going around on the top of those poles, even if the breaches are more than 10 amas, mutter, that's going to be permitted, because that's essentially, we had this picture on the previous daf, at Tzuris HaPesach, because if you have these poles stuck in and you have a braided vine going around the top, so it's essentially like a door frame, and that permits by Klein, as we said in Daf Yomi, even more than 10 amas. So therefore, that would be permitted even more than 10 amas, because that wouldn't be considered as a breach. That would be considered as a pesach, and a pesach can be more than 10 amas. Okay, that was the brisa. A little bit complicated, 3 different cases, but the main point is like this. Tani mi as Reisha, as we already pointed out when we were saying it. One thing is we learned out in the second case that we spoke about. We said migimel ba'adalid. If let's say the boards are from 3 to 4 tvachim, that we said, okay, it's going to be permitted. As long as you don't have between the boards, what's called the gap area, as long as it doesn't have kimilui, like the closed off area, then it's going to be permitted, which the inference is. But let's say it is the same amount, what's called parad's ka'imid, it's going to be asur. Tiyufta Rav Papa, that refutes Rav Papa, he says parad's ka'imid is mutter. Here we see from the brisa it's going to be asur. Rav Papa says, no, my milui, and this is what the Gemara was saying from the previous stuff when he was asking all these questions. We had similar type of answer. He said, what do we mean milui? We mean nichnis v'yoytze. We mean that it could easily come in and go out. So when the Bryce was saying, whatever's 3 tvachim, up until 4 tvachim, you have to make sure that you don't have benzelas and milui, you don't have the same amount, what fills it up. It means nichnis v'yoytze. That the breach should not be like the closed off area, that it could easily come and go, which that's not just parts ka'imid, that would be parts merubah la'imid, because you're leaving more than just the same amount, a little bit more. So, and that actually says Rashi is what the Gemara continues, the Brisa continues and says, and if the parts is merubah la'imid, which is the case that we're describing, then even kineged ha'imid is going to be asur, because since you're surrounding it with something that's not significant, because the width of each board is not 4 tvachim, then actually the whole area is going to be invalidated, even opposite the board itself. So therefore, it's not difficult on a papa. And the Gemara actually says Hachanam Mistabra. It's actually logical to say like a papa. Why? Because the Brisa continues in that same case and says parts which is the point we pointed that out when we were saying it also. And that says the Brisa. Let's say from that case of between 3 and 4 tvachim, the breach was more than the closed area. Then av keneged oimed asa. Then even the opposite, the board itself is going to be asa. Wait a second. Sounds like that's only if the breach is more. But let's say it's the same amount as the board itself, mutter would be permitted. Shemam, obviously you see that, like, to the contrary, like Rav Papa, that parts ka'imid is mutter. And like we pointed this out over here, that wording actually sounds like a Papa, not like Rav Huna. Okay, says the Gemara, fine, you for sure resolved Rav Papa, but limit up to Rav Huna to be sure. So let's say that refutes Rav Huna, because Rav Huna says that it's, that he says forbidden, he see that it's parts ka'imid would be permitted, only parts merubah is a problem. So he would tell you, no, according to your reasoning, aim is safer. Look at the safer, which is not in this picture. When we were talking about the klolim, we said that we said that if the closed off area is more than the breach area, we said af keneged parts mutter. When you have oimim meruba, you don't have to only do it now opposite where the fence of the wall is, the fence of the courtyard. You can even do it opposite the open areas because it's still considered all closed off. Now the inference is because oimim meruba parts, but hakib parts, but it's the same amount as the breach. Every word here is important, the linguistic. Hakib parts, but it's a breached area, asur would be forbidden. So you see, to the contrary, like Rav Huna, that it would be asur. So the Gemara points out, okay, sefer kasha al papa, the sefer is difficult to Rav Papa, and reisha kasha wouldn't be the shiur because we just showed opposite inferences from the brisa itself. So the Gemara says, Sefer Rav Papa Kasha, and each one is going to say the same type of an answer. The Sefer is not difficult to Rav Papa. Why? I did the Tana Reisha. Once we said in the Reisha parts Merubah Imid that if the breached area is more than the closed area, that's going to be Aser, which Rashi points out that we had to say like that. Why do we have to say like that? Because we wanted to reveal regarding the beginning of the statement, which said about the halach of don't make it kimilui, that's going to be Aser, which Rav Papa had translated that, no, it doesn't mean precisely kimilui. It was actually saying that it was nichnas v'yaitze. So that's why we had to tell you that and clarify that paritz merub is a problem. But when it's paritz kiloim with the same amount, they actually would be permitted, even opposite the breach area, which that's like Rav Papa. So since we had to say paritz merub aloimid, that's the problem, so Tana Sefer, that's why the Sefer, just to keep the same style, said said when the board is more than the breached area, even though you don't have to say it, because from the Bryce itself, from the ratio, we already said that even if the Oimid's Kaparitz is going to be permitted, and we know that from, like we said, from the fact that it says that it shouldn't be parts meruba, which we explain means to say that, it shouldn't be parts ka'imid, which we say what means kimilui, which Rav Papa already explained, means nichnis v'yaitze. But if it's precise, we say it's going to be permitted. So if a sho'im and meruba part is going to be permitted, you're right, that's what the Gemara is saying for Rav Papa. It's only because of the ratio, that's why we said the similar wording in the Sefer, but not to make it the inference, but ha'ka parts would be asa. That's not true. And similarly, ratio, Rav Hu and the Rabbi Shloimy Kasha gives a similar type of an answer. I did it by the Mishnah Sefer, since we have to say in the Sefer, that if the closed off area is more than the breach area, then it's going to be permitted, which again Rashi comes to explain, says, and we had to say like that. So tell you the Chiddush, but if it is kaparts, if the same amount as the breach, then actually would be asur. So therefore, Tana Reisha, the Reisha said the same style, a parts merubah lo'emed, that if the breached area is more than the closed area, even though it's not necessary to say that, because even kaimed itself is asur, but that's why we said parts merubah lo'emed, but really it's not only parts merubah, it would even be parts kaimed, that it would be asur. Fine, we resolved it like that. But in that says the Gemara, Bishlam Rav Papa. We understand according to Rav Papa, and this is a little bit complicated also, but it's an interesting Gemara here. The Gemara says, we understand according to Rav Papa that he says that Paritz Ka'imid is mutter. He says if the breach is the same as the closed off area, it's going to be permitted. So Mishum Hachi Lo Arvu. So therefore we could understand why we did not mix together part of the second case, which had, the second case was when it's from 3 to 4 tvachim. We understand why you didn't mix the 3 tvachim together with some of the first case when it was less than 3 tvachim, v'tanilu, and to learn them both together and to say whatever is less than 3 tvachim and 3 tvachim, you have to make sure that you don't have between the poles 3 tvachim. No, according to our public, you could not have said that. You couldn't say that you have to have that. You shouldn't have between each one 3 tvachim, because if the pole is 3 tvachim, we don't care if the breach is 3 tvachim, because that's paritz ka'imid, and that would be permitted. So therefore, he had to separate and to teach them separately, and to say the 3 tvachim case together with the less than 4 tvachim case, and to say that the thing we have to be concerned when the pole is 3 tvachim, and that it shouldn't be kimiluyah, which that would sound like, as we had already said according to our Papa, and menechnes v'yaitze, you can't have that, it's a little bit more than that, which then that would be a problem, because then you had paritz merubah lo imid. That would be the concern. Now, but Eruvin Daf, the Gemara has an interesting question. He says, paritz ka'imid is us. He says the breach, if it's the same as the closed off area, it's going to be a problem. So then you have the following question. La'arvinu, you should mix together we said 3 cases, less than 3 tvachim, but from 3 up until 4 tvachim, and 4 up until 10 hours. So we kept on getting bigger. The case of 3 tvachim itself, according to Rav Huna, should have been mixed together with this case of less than 3 tvachim. And we should have said like this: whatever if the stick is less than 3 tvachim, and even if the stick itself is 3 tvachim, you have to make sure that you don't have between them 3 tvachim. Why? This case we know why it can't be less than 3 tvachim, because it has to be loved. Without loved, you don't have mechitza at all, because each pole is just very little. So it's only there. But here also, when it's 3 tvachim itself, also has to have that you don't have 3 tvachim, because if you have 3 tvachim, what is it? Paritz ka'imid. Paritz ka'imid, you hold this asur. So it should also have to say, why is this case of 3 tvachim part of the next category? It should be part of the first category. So the Gemara also has a very interesting answer and says, you're right. It would be technically the same words. But you cannot compare the invalidation of the first case of when it's less than 3 tvachim, l'psul d'seifa, to the invalidation of the next case of when it is 3 tvachim. Although it has the same halachic wording, it's not the same halacha. Psula dereisha, the invalidation of the first case when it's less than 3 tefachim, there you cannot say that the reason is because of paritz meruba, because the breach being more than the closed area. Because we said, as long as the breach is not 3 tefachim, even if the pole is just 1 tefach and the closed area is 2 tefachim, we're going to say it's going to be kosher because he's still going to say love it. But when you get to a breach of 3 tefachim, so then, over here, in this case, when the breach is 3 tefachim, then we're concerned for a gedi. A kid's going to be able to run through, a kid goat. Therefore, that's going to be a problem, even if, let's say, the border is more than 3 tefachim. But over here, by this case, so why are you going to invalidate when you have a breach of 3 tefachim, when the board itself is 3 tefachim? That's not because of you're not going to have loved. We don't need loved. This is already significant in its own right. Rather, that's going to be the case of the Reisha is Kadesh Lizdakar Hagadi B'Vasachas, is that you shouldn't have a kid go walking right through. But Psula, the Seifa, and invalidation of the Seifa, again, where the pole is 3 tefachim, that's not a problem because of the kid goat walking through. Because if, like we said, if the board was more than the breached area, we wouldn't be concerned for the Gedi. The halacha of the breach is only because Shlei Paretz Ka'imid, that you shouldn't have that the breach being the same as the closed off area. And that's what Rashi explains, that Tana is coming to teach us the measurements of the mechitzas. And when we could come and tell you a new reasoning for invalidation, and to say it's contingent on another invalidation, therefore we said it, and therefore it's not difficult to contra You're right. When the border is 3 tvachim, it's going to have the same halacha that you shouldn't have between the 3 tvachim, but they're different reasons. Here it's because when it's more than 3 tvachim, you're going to lose laved. Here it's not because you're going to lose laved. Here it's because you're going to have paritz ka'imid, and therefore we said them separately, even though you're right, it would have the same halacha. But now the Gemara asks a contradiction in the Brisa itself. The Brisa had said there was 3 cases, as we said. The first case said pachis mishleishav. Let's say the boards are less than 3 tefachim. So then we said that you have to have less than 3 tefachim gap between the boards. Says the Gemara, Mani. Who's this Tana that's saying this case that's differentiating between if the closed off area is less than 3 tefachim, like this case, or if it's 3 tefachim, like in this case? Who do we find that differentiates from an area of 3 to less than 3? That's Rabbani. It's Rabbana who we know that regarding the laws of Lavid, they differentiate between if it's 3 tefachim or more than 3 tefachim. More than 3 tefachim, they say it's not Lavid anymore. Less than 3 tefachim, they say it is Lavid. The Amri, they say pachas mishleish than 3 tefachim as love. We say that it's closed off. Shleisha, it's already 3 loim in Lavid. We don't say it's closed off, and it's already a significant area. So seemingly, this halacha that's differentiating the boards itself, which the Mefarshim explain what's the comparison, but we see if it's considered a significant area or insignificant, we see that 3 or less than 3, which the Brisa is differentiating, would be like the Rabban. But Ema Sefer, look at the end of the Brisa. The Brisa says, this middle case said, Kosher Shleisha, if the border is 3, or Mishleisha Badarba, or from 3 up until 4 Tfachim. The Brisa is starting to differentiate from if it's less than 4 Tfachim to be more than 4 Tfachim, because the second case is saying if it's less than 4 Tfachim, if you have the breach more than the closed area, then it's also even opposite the bordered area itself. But when we said in the third case, if the board itself is 4 tefachim, we said that actually it's going to always permit obviously the board itself, even though the breach is more than the closed off area. So obviously, as you continue to the base, that since we're saying that the middle case up until 4 tefachim, this middle case, not including 4 tefachim, is because that's included already in this fourth case. That if it's 4 tefachim up until 10 amas, that here it's suddenly going to have a different status because it's a really significant board. Says Gemara Sallah Shimon Gamliel. That's like Shimon Gamliel. Doma, he says pachas marabala, but he says actually less than 4 tefachim we're going to consider something as the area. He wouldn't hold that less than 3 tefachim space. He would hold if it's at least less than 4 tefachim space. Then you're going to say love it, as we already quoted him on the previous daf. So comes out that. This is Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, because as the Gemara says, the Rabbanan, if you think the safe is also like Rabbanan, Mishleisha Badarba, then the second case, which talks about from if the boards are between 3 and 4 tefachim, who differentiates between 3 and 4 tefachim? That we're saying not including the 4 tefachim, the safe, because that's the safe that says if it's 4 tefachim, according to Rabbanan, Shleisha Badarba, if it's 3 or 4 tefachim, it's the same thing. So why are you saying when it's 4 tefachim, it's a different category than when it's less than 4 tefachim? Who differentiates between 4 and less than 4? That's Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. The Rabbanan don't differentiate between 4 and less than 4. They differentiate between 3 and less than 3. So the Brisa itself that brings these 3 categories seems to be contradictory. From the ratio that would differentiate between 3 and less than 3, it sounds like Rabbanan. From the last case and the middle case, when you differentiate between 4 and less than 4, that sounds like Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. So says the Gemara, 2 different approaches. Amabayis is the ratio Rabbanan, from the fact that the ratio is Rabbanan, that we see the differentiate between 3 and less than 3, Sefer Nam Rabbanan, the Sefer is also like Rabbanan. But Rabbanan agree regarding this halacha of klayim differentiating with a wall on either side, that's different than the law of Lavan, which even in the Havamina, the Mefarshim are challenged to try to explain what the necessarily comparison was. But the Cholim Mishri Kenegdai, if you're coming to permit an area opposite a wall, if you have an area of walled off that's 4 tzvachim, that's considered significant. And if not, not considered significant. There's a different halacha than Lavan. Although the Rabbanan differentiate between 3 and less than 3, but regarding a board itself, which we said, even when you have parts of Meruba, you can be able to go ahead and plant on the other side of the board, notwithstanding, because it's already a board of 4, that even the Rabban would agree. Because only 4 tzvachim is considered a makam chashin to be able to plant on the other side. For Lavan, that's what they differentiate between 3 and less than 3. But regarding the board itself, that they would agree is going to be 4 tzvachim. Rav Amay he gives a different approach. He says, no, but the Sefer B'Shem from the fact that the Sefer is B'Shem Gamliel, where we're saying that we're differentiating between 4 and less than 4, then Reisha, which actually says that the permissibility of Lavan is only up until 3 tzvachim, is Nam B'Shem Gamliel, is also B'Shem Gamliel. So wait a second. But didn't we say B'Shem Gamliel holds Lavan up until 4 tzvachim? No. And we already said this in the previous Daf too. When did he say Amrin Lo? Then we say Lo up until 4 tzvachim. That's on top, for example, like by the crossbeam. We said that if let's say you have one crossbeam not reaching the wall or reaching the other crossbeam, we said okay up until 4 tzvachim we'll say Love. But Avalamata, when you're below on the bottom of the ground, then he would agree when it's more than 3 tzvachim would be invalid. Why? Because you have a different problem. It's like a wall that goats are walking through. You can't say a virtual wall closing it open, goats are walking through, and 3 tvachim is enough for a goat to walk through, and therefore he would agree in that case that love would only be up to 3 tvachim. So therefore again, there's no contradiction in the Brayse. Either like Abaye said that it's all like Rabban, all like Rava, who it's all like Reb Shimon Gamliel. But the Gemara brings one final proof regarding this halacha of Paretz Ka'imid, which is Machlekes and Ram Tashma. Says the Gemara, we learned in the Brayse, the Fanas Halalu, these walls, if Sheruban Pesachim Echaloin said most of it is openings and windows, that mutter, so then the area is going to be permitted. As long as you don't have more, as long as you have more closed area than breached area, which the Gemara jumps in and asks, wait a second, Sheruban Sokataitach? Are you really saying that the closed area is more than the open area? But you already said that most of it is opens, windows and openings. Or rather, no, you're right. It means it means there was many windows and doorways. Then mutter is going to be permitted, but it wasn't most. It was many. As long as you have more closed area than breached area. So it makes the Gemara the following deep. But let's say it is like the breached area, then it would be forbidden. So that refutes Rav Papa, who he says parts kaimed is mutter. Here we see clearly that parts kaimed would be asr. So the Gemara says, it's a refutation, but says the Gemara, Hilchas HaKavasei Rav Papa, Allah actually follows like Rav Papa. The Gemara says, I understand, you just refuted him, but Hilchas, you said Allah is like him. Says the Gemara, yes. Because our Mishnah, our previous Mishnah is precise like Rav Papa. Because it's not written in our Mishnah when they spoke about a shiur, a caravan, it said that, okay, you could enclose the caravan in the out where they're camping, and you could carry over there. But lo yi paratzis, he says something. We said as long as you don't have more breached area than the built area. The inference is hokabinyan, but if you have the same amount, then mutter would be permitted. So therefore, our mission is more authoritative, and therefore we're going to say that the halacha is going to be like Rav Papa. Now we continue with the next Mishnah, which continues on, as Rashi explains, on the halacha of shayara, on the caravan, which they're resting in out in an open field somewhere. So we have the following interesting halacha. It says the Mishnah, Makif and Shlish Chaval. You could wrap around 3 ropes, Zelam al Mazeh, one above the other one, and the Zelam al Mazeh, the one on top of the other one, which how you do that is you make a pole on either side, and then you wrap the ropes around it. As long as you don't have the gap between one rope and the other one of 3 tfachim, so let's say from the bottom one to the ground you have less than 3 tfachim, so that's all considered oymen, all closed, because through Lavid we viewed it as if it's closed. Now, from that rope to the middle rope is also less than 3 tfachim. So you have 6 tfachim of oymen, of closed area, minus 2 mashahus from the 2 ear space, because you have to have within 3 tfachim. And then from the middle rope until the top rope is also less than 3 tfachim. So you have in that ear space less than 3. So then you have now 9 tfachim closed minus 3 mashahus, because again it has to be within 3 tfachim. So therefore, that's what the Mishnah explains. Shir chavalim ba'avion, so the measurement of the ropes and their thickness has to be yeser al tefach, has to be more than the tefach in totality with 3 mashahus more. So everything should be 10 tefachim again, because if this is width and 3 tvachim, and this is width and 3 tvachim, and this is width 3 tvachim, so 3, 6, 9, but a little bit less than that because it has to be width and 3 tvachim, so a little bit less than 9 tvachim. So then these 3 ropes together have to total a tafach together. It'll be 9 plus 1 is 10. And again, it has to be like each one has to be a mashu also more than that, because here was not really 3, it was a little bit less than 3. So that would make for a total of 10 tvachim. We're going to view it all as if it's close. Similarly, you could do the same thing, not just horizontally, but you could do the same thing vertically. Makif and Bekanim. You could surround the area of the camp with poles stuck into the ground standing up, and that's what's known as a mechitza of shesi, of vertical, because the ropes is considered mechitza of erev, of horizontal. Now you could do the same thing, and here also, as long as you don't have between each pole 3 tvachim, that's going to work. We're going to view it as if it's all closed, and again, this is what a lot of people do on their porches when it comes to Sukkot time. They do it, they close it off, because it's considered as love, it's considered as a mechitza. Now, however, we have a 4-way machlokes regarding when did we say this halacha of our Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, B'shiyar dibru, Divrei Yehuda. Yehuda says we only said this by a caravan. By them, we were lenient that they're not going to have either. They could have either a wall of vertical poles or horizontal ropes. But for an individual, they weren't lenient until he has both shasi and erev, until it's crisscross. Now, a chamer of the sages said they disagree. They said no, like dibru b'shiyar. We didn't speak about a caravan, el b'hay, only because that's what's common. A caravan tends to be in that type of situation, but the truth is they hold that even by an individual would be permitted with this mechitza of even just shasi or of erev. Third opinion says no. Kol mechitza she'ena shel shasi v'shel erev. Any partition that doesn't have both vertical and horizontal, any mechitza is not going to be considered as a partition for anybody. That's the Rabbi Yehuda. He disagrees with his father in the Mishnah, and he says that even for a caravan, you need to have shasi v'erev. You need to have both the horizontal and vertical. The sages say no. It could be one of 2 things, either shasi or of erev. Which actually, as we'll see in the Gemara, that the machlekes is going to be whether we allow kol tzarkan. That's the machlekes, as we'll explain in the Gemara. But first, the Gemara has an interesting question relating to the halacha of the Mishnah. Amar Rav Nuna Amar Rav, he says, okay, Hare Amar, we already had previously said, Oymin meruba laparts b'shasi. If you have more closed area than breached area by vertical poles, we know that hava oymin. We know that that's going to be considered as if it's closed, even though you have more breached area, because that was the Mishnah from the previous Daf that we said, you can't have more breaches than the closed area. Now that was a case where we said that if you have the saddles and the camels, the kli behema, now that is what's called shesi, because they're standing on the ground. Then you have, imagine the animals and the saddles and the saddlebags all surrounding the area. We said, okay, that's going to be okay, as long as the oymed is more than the parrots. By vertical things, we'll view it as all as all closed off. That was from the previous Mishnah. But Rav Nuna wants to know is be'erev mai. What would be the halacha if you have it oymed meruba parrots from in horizontal, not in vertical, which as Rashi points out. Wait a second, don't you know this from the halacha of Mishnah regarding the ropes? No, says Rashi. No, you know why that wouldn't prove it? Because that's all oymed. The case we said in the Mishnah is all oymed because there's lavin. So there's not a good case of oymed meruba parrots, because that's all closed, because of love. So that wouldn't explain it. So that's why he's asking, what would the halacha be if you have a case of oymin meruba parrots? When there's erev by its horizontal, then, or if you think about it, the way we're looking at it is vertical, what would the halacha be? Some Abai says, Tashma. He says, okay, but I can bring you a raya from our Mishnah. Because the Mishnah said, Shir chavalim ba'avyin. The measurement of the ropes and their thickness, we said it has to be yesra al tefach, has to be in totality more than a tefach. Shia kol asar tefachim, that all of it should be 10 tefachim, because the gaps are less than 3 tefachim each, and then the ropes will fill up the gap to be total of 10 tefachim. Says Abai like this. Says V'i Isa, if you would think to say that you see oymin meruba parts by erev too, lomali yesra al tefach. Why do you need that the rope should be more than a tefach? You know what you could do like this. Li'avid, do like this. Do that the first airspace should be pachas mishlesha, like we said, less than 3 tefachim. V'chevel mashu, and make the rope just a little bit. So too the second time. Upachas mishlesha, make another gap less than 3 tefachim. V'chevel mashu, and the rope just a little bit. So now you're going to have 6 tefachim closed off, because you have width and 3 tefachim, and then you have again width and 3 tefachim. Now, but this is where he changes up. He says, so now upachas me'arba. By the third ear gap, you should make it less than 4 tefachim of a gap, and then a chevel mashu, then the small little rope. And you know why it's going to be kosher? Because you'll have a breach of 4 tefachim, but you have an oymed of 6 tefachim on the bottom through lavid. So you'll have oimim merubah laparitz. Why didn't you say that case? Obviously, it doesn't help. Oimim merubah laparitz when it comes to the Eruv. It only helps by chassis, because if it did, why would you have to say that you have to have that the ropes should be thicker to make a total of 10 tvachim? No, like less than 3 tvachim, again less than 3 tvachim, and then, like we said, instead of the way we're describing here in the Mishnah, that you have, don't make this 3 tvachim, make it a little bit higher, and you don't have to have each rope so thick, make it a little higher, this will be 4 tvachim of a gap, and then you have the rope over here. So you'll have 6 tvachim of oimid here on the bottom, and you'll have 4 tvachim of parts over here. But why didn't you say that? Obviously, because I'm merubah parts, it doesn't work in Eruv. Says the Gemara, is that logical? How could you say that? High pachas marba, this one gap that you're saying of less than 4 tvachim, where are you going to put that gap? As the Gemara explains, you wouldn't be able to have such a question to be relevant. If you say, okay, meaning we meant the bottom one should have that gap of more than 3 tvachim, just less than 4 tvachim, that's like a wall where the goats are walking through. Even if above this gap was a pillar of 10 tvachim, that was a full mechitza, we would still say it's not valid, because, as the Gemara actually is going to quote this shortly, mechitza tluya, hanging a partition, is not going to permit. And if the goats can walk underneath, it's not valid. So that wouldn't be a good question. And if you would say, like we were explaining initially, that the third gap, the third airspace, which is the upper one, that would be the one that should have less than 4 tvachim, then asya the high geese. The problem with that is that then the airspace, which is above the rope, going up to shemayim, and the high geese and the airspace beneath it, which is beneath that rope, going down to between it and the middle one, which is also airspace, because you're telling me that it's, I'm talking about over here, this is more than 4 tvachim, this obviously has more than 4 tvachim. The airspace on either side of it is going to be considered as quote-unquote avir, because it's more than 3 tvachim, so you can't consider it as closed because it's not less than 3 tvachim, it's more than 3 tvachim. So then the air on either side is going to be mevatel, it's going to nullify the rope that's in the middle. And then actually you're only going to have 6 tvachim of a wall, so of course not going to be valid. So you can't put the 4 tvachim over here. And imokim lo b'mitzvah, and if you would think, you'd say, we're talking about in the middle gap, that's where we should say, okay, let this be less than 3 tvachim, let this bottom one be less than 3 tvachim, let this middle one be less than 4 tvachim. Okay, but then you're only going to have that the closed area is more than the breached area by a combination of the two sides. You're not going to have Oimid Merubah only if you combine the two sides to nullify the middle side, because you have more Oimid on the parts by combination. Shamit Mana, then you should infer from here, Oimid Merubah that if you have more closed area than breached area only from a combination of the two sides, that's considered Oimid, and that's not the case. We don't rule like that, Mandama. So therefore that wouldn't be viable either. So therefore the case you're asking wouldn't be a viability, so therefore that's not a valid question. So Elorada says the Gemara, you're right. Since we don't have such an option of such a question, actually he was asking a different type of a question, which is like this. We're talking about where actually you bring a mat. You bring like a mat, a sheet, dahava zayin mashu, which was actually, and this is just showing that picture of what we were doing in the other one, about showing the 3 different cases. But says the Gemara, this case is that we're describing over here. You bring a mat that's a little bit more than 7 tvachim. V'chakuk b'gimel, and you carved out in it an area of 3 tvachim. V'shavik b'dal, now you left 4 tvachim on the top that's intact. And umashu, and you also leave a little bit on the bottom from the where you carved out the 3 tvachim. V'ukmei, and then you put it that where this side of the where there's a little bit of the mat still left, you put that b'pachas megim, you put it less than 3 tvachim from the ground. Now you have oimid merubah parts from even one side, which is on the upper side. Here's 4 tvachim. There's only 3 tvachim. Additionally, you cannot say that the avra of this geese and avra of this geese should be mevatel. This that you cannot say, because since the oimid is merubah on the avra that's beneath it, so then you can't say asi avir. The avir is only when you have on both sides that it's more than it's going to nullify. Here on this side, it's not more than that, so you can't say that I was going to be mevatel. And this is the case that Ramuna had been asking when we're having oimid merubah la paritz. That's the case, like we said, by Shesi, by vertical poles, we say merubah la paritz works. So here by Erev, oimid merubah la paritz, that was the question that Rav Nuna was asking regarding such a case. That's the question. Would you say over there oimid merubah la paritz, that it's going to be permitted? Rav Ashi, he says a different case was the question, which was mechitza tluyi boile. His question was a hanging partition. So let's say you have a mat that is 10 tvachim, but you've elevated from the ground more than 3 tvachim. That's Rav Nuna's question. Would we say that the oimid of the closed area would be mavatal the parts that's beneath it, since it's less than that, or would you not say that? To which the Gemara says, that's Kedebayim Nei Rav Tavla Mirab, which she said, Mechitza Tluya, hanging partition, Ma'ashat HaBechor does it permit by a ruin, which that's just normally where you find hanging walls. You don't usually find hanging walls unless the building is dilapidated. Amalei said to him, no, Ein Mechitza Tluya Materis, no, hanging partition is not going to permit, El B'mayim, only in water. It permits to draw the water, for example, when you have a porch, which is above water, as we say later on, that Pezayim a base, that's only one place where we permit, because Kalu Shekil Chacham B'mayim, that's a leniency that we were lenient by waters, but usually Mechitza Tluya is not going to be permitting. So again, if that was the question, then we say that doesn't help. But the Gemara did not answer the question of this case of when you're having Oima Rubel parts, would we say that it's going to work by Erev too, not just like we say by that of Shasi. So now the Gemara continues and says, we said in the Mishnah, Makifin B'kanim B'chulu. So this actually goes back to what we had mentioned previously. I'm explaining the Mishnah. So we had this machlekes in the Mishnah, where we said, okay, if you're surrounding the camp with poles, so we had a machlekes, this leniency that you can make a partition just made out of poles, was that specifically by a camp or not? So Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, the Gemara is going to ask a contradiction, because Rabbi Yehuda had said, B'shiyara'in, by a camp, a caravan, then they could go ahead and do this leniency of making vertical poles to make a mechitza. But b'yachal, it sounds like an individual cannot do this. But B'tanya, in the Brayis Yibidam, he says, Kol mechitza Shabbos, all walls of Shabbos, meaning, as Rashi explains, all these inferior walls, which are, let's say, either just horizontal or vertical poles, which we permit for when there's a whole caravan in this extreme situation, says Rabbi Yehuda, Lo hitiru liyachid, we didn't permit it for an individual, when it's yisim bebeis side, when it's more than an area of 2 sa. In other words, if you surrounded an individual, let's say Shabbos, he's out in the field, an area that more than 2 sa, then even though it's surrounding it for dwelling purposes, because he's surrounding himself that he should stay there for over Shabbos, that's not going to help if it was more than the area of 2 sa. But it sounds like, but if it's less than 2 sa, it would be permitted, even according to Yehuda. That's not like he says in the Mishnah. He makes it sound like that surrounding yourself with these inferior mechitzas only is going to work for a caravan. That's not going to work for an individual. And that says the Gemara, because Rav Nachman. It's not difficult. Like Rav Nachman said, Vitam says it was Rav Bibi Bar Abaye, which we're going to say shortly what was that teaching said on. But just like he says over there, Lo Nitzcho, you didn't need to say, which says that's regarding invalidation of an inferior wall. If it's more than the area 2 saw, a litman called Sarkin, that's only if you want to go ahead and give them everything that they need. Regarding called Sarkon, that's where we say it. Oh, so it says the Gemara Hachanami, we're going to compare it over here to Rabbi Yehuda. When he said in the Mishnah that we only said this leniency regarding a caravan, not to an individual, it wasn't in absolute terms. That was only Litlan called Sarkin. That was only we don't give the individual everything that he needs with these walls. But if it's an area of 2 sa, we would most definitely allow him to make it with just a mechitza of shasu with vertical poles, since he's surrounding himself for residential purposes. Now, that's what we're saying, but a caravan is better. For them, we give them kol tzarkan, we give them all that they need. So according to Yehuda, what we're saying is that yes, a yachid would get an area basis sign equal to the chatzah mishkan of 5,000 square miles. This that we're saying is only for shiyarman kol tzarkan for all their needs. But you're right, as we see in the Brayis, he would allow it for yachid up until 2 sa. Now says the Gemara, Heichi Itmad Rav Nachman. You were comparing Rav Nachman's qualification of a different teaching to explain it for Rabbi Yehuda. So we was Rav Nachman meet him and some say Rabbi Bai. What was that son? It was actually said on the Hadanan. It's actually said on our Mishnah too, on one of the other opinions of Rabbi Yehuda. Because you learn our Mishnah, Kol Mechitza Shem Nishal Shasi Be'erev. One opinion says if the partition is not made out of vertical and horizontal sticks, then the mechitza is not going to be considered as a mechitza. That's Rabbi Yehuda. On that, the question was, it's just like we asked Rabbi Yehuda. On that third opinion, the Gemara asked on them too. Well, Rabbi Yehuda, did he really say this? But you have a contradiction about Tanya on his opinion. Because you learn a Brayis that says, Echad Yachid ve'Echad Shiur. Whether it's an individual or whether it's a caravan, they all have the same halacha l'chavalim for the ropes. Meaning, we permit, same like we said regarding the vertical, the horizontal ropes, one on top of the other, even though there's only Erev. Now, Ma ben Yachid Shiur, then what's the difference between an individual and the caravan? The difference is Yachid no yishloi beis sign. An individual, we only give him in the area of 2 sa when it's this type of mechitza, because if it's a regular mechitza, you give him as much as he needs. But we're talking about you can have a huge, acres of land. But if you have these inferior type mechitzas, they will only give up until 2 sa. So to Shnaim, if there's 2 people together out in the open fields, Nishlam basis will only give them 2 sa. Gimel, once you're already 3 people, Nasser Shayar, then they become a caravan. For Nishlam base Sheish, then you give them an area of 6 sa. That's Rabbi Yehuda. The Chamrim, they say, no, Echad Yachid Echad, whether individual, whether you're a caravan, doesn't make a difference. Nishlam called Tarkan, they get all their needs, which that's actually explaining the Chacham of our Mishnah too. Eventually, basis sign pun, as long as you don't have what's called an area that's unnecessary, that's going to be open of 2 saw. Meaning, you can't go ahead and surround the wall around them if it's more than necessary. You could have a margin of error up until 2 saw, but even according to the Chachamim, you can't have an open gap of 2 saw. Okay, but that's the Bryce. One thing is, you see contradiction. Rabbi Yehuda, he permits a yachid for Beis Hasayim. But didn't he say in the Mishnah that it's only going to be said regarding a shayara? And also, didn't he say that it's only going to be if it's shasi ve'erev? And that says the Gemara. No, he didn't have to say a litlin called sarkon. No, Rabbi Yesi in the Mishnah that he says that if it doesn't have shasi ve'erev, it's not going to be mechitza. That only meant to say it's not going to be mechitza l'chol sarkon for whatever they need to be as big as they want to be. But it is going to be mechitza for an individual for Beis Hasayim. And for Shayar, it's going to be up until 6 saw. Now, the Gemara says, Lahalacha, Dash Rab Nachman Mishum Rabbeinu Shmuel, that Yachid, an individual, Noislam Beis Hasayim, we give him an area of 2 saw. Beis, if there's 2 people, Noislam Beis Hasayim, we also give an area of 2 saw. Gimel, 3 people, Nasu Shayar, they became a caravan, but Noislam Beis Hasayim, we give an area of 6 saw. Now, that sounds just like we said, Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara asked, Shavkish Rabban, you leave the Rabban when you come to Paskin Lacha, that they said that you could give what we said, called Sarkon, you could give everyone in an individual called Tzarkin v'avdis Rabbi Yehuda, and you're ruling Rabbi Yehuda who says that no, a yachid can only base Hasayim and shiur can only have only 6 saw. What do you mean? The Chacham say you can have as much as you need. So Hada Okim Reb Nachman Amar Lebedar. So he writes, Reb Nachman, when he heard the question, he subsequently put up a speaker and he expounded like this: says the Barim Shemat Lefnechem, what I had said in front of you twice and beyond was a mistake. Barim, however, Kacham, and this is what they really said: Yachid individual, nice and base Hasayim. Yeah, you only get 2 saw. Shnayim, 2 people, nice and base Hasayim. You only get an area if you have these inferior walls of 2 saw. Shleisha, 3 people, Nasa Share, that becomes a caravan, and then you're right, like the Chum say, Nislan called Tzarkin, we give them all that they need. Now, as you get Tinta, B'Zayin, and so the Gemara still asks, okay, but still Reisha, the Reisha, Rabbi Yehuda, he says by individual you only get 2 saw. Because according to Rabbanan, they said even individual get called Tzarkin. The safe, and only the safest are like Rabbanan. Where by a caravan you're saying called Tzarkin. Why are you ruling in the Reisha like Rabbi Yehuda? It's still not all like Rabbanan. And yes, you know why they will rule like Rabbi Yehuda? Because it's not only his opinion. His father, the father of Rabbi Yehuda, which Rabbi Yehuda, he's also Bishitase, in that he holds like his father by an individual. Rabbi Yehuda also says that you only get 2 saw, albeit he says with either a vertical or horizontal. Rabbi Yehuda holds he says it has to be trusted. But they agree up until of Beis Hasayim, that then in that halacha they both agree Beis Hasayim, so that's why by Yachid he rules like that, whereas by Shiara, which that Rabbi Yehuda he's not like that, and therefore he would rule like the Chachamim, that by Shiara then you would be able to get called Tzarkin. Some of this we spoke about in today's Daf Masechtas Eruvin Daf Tezayin was we spoke about a continuation of rayas regarding if paritz is ka'imit, if it's exactly the same amount, get a machlekes amaran. So we want to bring a raya from Mishnah Masechtas Klayim. The Mishnah there spoke about 3 different measurements of mechitzas. First, less than 3 tfachim. Then we spoke about from 3 up until 4 tfachim. And the 4th category was between 4 tfachim and 10 amas. So it kept on getting bigger. So regarding less than 3 tfachim, we said the halacha is you have to have that you don't have the gap between them more than 3 tfachim. As long as it's less than 3 tfachim, so you have loved it, so then that's going to be a valid, because if not, you have a problem of like gedi. A kid goat could come in, and it's not a valid mechitza. Between 3 and 4 tfachim, he says that you shouldn't have at least between them kimilui, the same amount as the closed area. We're not concerned for being 3 tfachim because you don't need loved, because as long as you have oimen merub, it's going to be okay. But one thing you see, and this was the raya, see parts come is going to be a problem, because you say you shouldn't have a kimilui. And then actually the Bryce says if you have the breach more than that, as one of the Amaram explained, or the same amount, then actually even opposite the Ayman, that's significant between the 2nd case and the 3rd case, which sounds similar, but that's one of the big differences, is going to be also even opposite the area of the closed area. But let's say the boards themselves are anywhere from 4 tvachim up until 10 amas, then also you have to make sure that you don't have kimiloi, because then you have parts kaimid. But even when it's parts kaimid, or even parts merubal aymed, you would, opposite the aymed, since it's significant of 4 tvachim, you would be able to go ahead and plant opposite that board. Then the Bryce said 3 rules that we learn out from these halachas. When it's aymed meruba, when the closed up area is more than the breached area, then even opposite the breached area is going to be permitted, because we view it as all closed. When you have a breach more than 10 amas, then it's going to be forbidden the whole area, because it's considered par, it's not considered closed anymore. The 3rd case was if you have a paya, which is a braided thing that's going on the top, then then it's going to be even more than 10 amos. It's going to be permitted because that's what's known as the Turas HaPesach. Now, one thing the Gemara asks is, one thing we see, it says, hey kimaloi, it shouldn't be kimaloi. So you see, parts come is going to be also that's difficult on Rav Papa says it's going to be permitted. So the Gemara says, no, he explains it when it says, when it shouldn't be kimaloi, it means nichtas v'yetzi could easily come in and out. What you're putting in between, that's actually going to be parts meruba. And actually, a sefer sounds like that it's going to be asa. But then the Gemara says, well, the ratio sounds like it's going to be mutter. So the Gemara says, yeah, each one wants to explain that really we only said one because of the other one. So it wasn't difficult in either opinion. We said really that was the primary, we had to say that. We only kept the same terminology, but really it's going to be either parts come as mutter or it's going to be asa. Now, but then we said, interestingly, we said, so why did you say the cases together of less than 3 tefachim with 3 tefachim? So we said, according to the ones who holds parts kaimet is going to be mutter, of course you can't say it together because Papa would say the case of 3 tefachim can't be together because actually, if it's the same amount as 3 tefachim, actually would be permitted. So you can't say with the case of the first case that it has to be that you don't have a breach of 3 tefachim. But the second case, according to your whole parts kaimet is aser, so it's difficult. Why don't you say the case of 3 tefachim together with the case of less than 3 tefachim? Because they both have the halacha of don't let the gap be at least 3 tefachim. The first case because you won't have love, but the second case because it'll be parts kaimet and that's going to be aser. So the Gemara says you're right, but the reasoning of their invalidation is different than if we said them separate. The halacha of the first case of part of less than 3 tefachim is a problem if you can have 3 tefachim of a gedi, if you're not going to have love. The second case of when it's 3 tefachim, although it's going to have the same halacha, but it's a different reasoning, is because of parts ka'imid, and therefore we said it in separate categories. But then we had a contradiction in the Brisa itself. The ratio sound like Drabanan because we would differentiate between less than 3 and 3. So it sounds like 3 is the magic number, which like Drabanan say that love it is up until 3 tefachim. The same sound like Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg because we differentiate between 3 and 4 tefachim. 4 tefachim is the magic number according to Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. So the Gemara had two approaches. Either yes, it's only Rabbanan, but the Rabbanan agreed to permit opposite the mechitza itself, even when you have parts meruba. But since you have a significant board, you can plant opposite it. That's only if you have a makam dalad. That Rabbanan would agree. Only then it's considered chash. Or you say that actually the whole price is Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. So what do you mean? Then why in the first case did you say you can't have the breaches more than 3 tefachim? He holds love it up until 4 tefachim. No, we don't say love it even according to Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg when it's more than 3 tefachim when it's on the bottom. Because the Gedoyim Aboikim, but he only says you say love it up until 4 tefachim. When you have, let's say, beams on the top where there's no kid goats, then he'll say love it up to 4 tefachim. And the Gemara rejected, and then said the halacha, however, is like Rav Papa. Why? Because although the Brisa says not like him, but our Mishnah is precise like him, where it's going to be mutter, and therefore parts ka'imid is mutter. Next Mishnah spoke about a case continuing on the halachas of shayara, which was in the previous Mishnah on the caravan. We said that you could surround it with 3 robes as long as less than 3 tefachim, one from the other. So too by chassis. Again, if you have poles, it's all considered a valid partition. Now, is when do we say this leniency of a wall, of a partition with vertical or horizontal? Either we only said it by a shayara, and again, then you could be either one or the other. That was Rabbi Yehuda. Then the Chum said, no, even by an individual, you always say this leniency. Or the third opinion was, Rabbi Yehuda, he says, no, you always need to have chassis and air. You can't have one or the other. And the Chacham Basra, which we'll explain in the next daf, that they're saying a bigger chiddush, even by a settled area you could do this. They say no, you could have either one or the other, which sounds again just like the halacha of the original Chacham. Then we had the question, what's if Oimid Merubah the parts? We said by Shesi, we say that we know it's going to be considered as Oimid. What, as we had learned in our previous Mishnah, as long as you don't have more parts Merubah, if it's Oimid Merubah, it's going to be valid. So we had a question, what's halacha be'erev? By if you have that same thing of Oimid Merubah going the horizontal ropes. And we said you cannot resolve from our Mishnah that what we said, so wait a second, make one of them a breach of 4 tefachim, and then you'll have 6 tefachim of Oimid. We said no, because if you have that 4 gap of less than tefachim on the bottom, you have Gedolim Boikim, but that's not going to work. If you have it on the top, then you have the Avira of high geese and Mevatel, that rope on the top. And if it's in the middle one, then you only have Oimid Merubah, Mishtei Ruchis, and we don't hold that. Oimid Merubah is going to work from 2 sides. So rather the question we said is either when you have a mat of 7 tefachim and a little bit, and you carved out a hole of 3 tefachim, but you left 4 tefachim on the top, and you also left a little bit on the bottom, and you put the bottom part less than 3 tefachim on the ground, that you're going to have a case of Oimid Merubah, the parts from the top to the bottom, and you're not going to have Avir, the Agis Mevatel, and you're going to have it connected on the bottom. That was the question. Would we say Oimid Merubah parts? That we didn't answer. We'll say that by Erev 2. Or the question was Mechitza Tluya, and that the Gemara says no, that only works by Mayim. We had in the Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda who says that the heter of Shasi or Erev is only by a shayar, only by a caravan. Now the problem is there's a brisa that says he permits for an individual as long as less than 2 sas. The Gemara says you're right. This that we said that you don't give to a yachid this leniency is only called sarkai, only all his needs. And that's actually the same answer we give for Rabbi Yehuda, who's the third opinion in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, he says you need to have shasi and erev. A Brisa says he permits it even if you have shasi or erev. You're right, he will permit it, but not kol tzarkan. In our Mishnah, when he says we're not going to let it, is when you don't have kol tzarkan. Now, halacha, the Gemara says we rule like Rabbanan that by a shayara you'll get kol tzarkan. By Yachid, however, we rule like Rabbi Yesi. Why like Rabbi Yesi, not like Rabbanan? Because his father's like him too, where he says that you don't give to individual only sasayim, which that was only by shayara that he permitted. So obviously by Yachid, which we said is sasayim. So regarding that, his father's like him, and therefore in that halacha, it's not just one Tana, it's his father like him too, and therefore we rule like Rabbi Yehuda, which is like his father, Rabbi Yehuda. Thank you to any type of hosting us.